costs you even more when you are in office than sometimes when you are campaigning, because the demands on you, even when you are in office, can be quite colossal. And actually, with the studies we did with the on MPs in 2018 actually establishes that the cost of actually serving as an MP is significant. So it's not, none of these issues are going to be in isolation. As I said, we have to, as you said, consider it as a full value chain and understand how we can address all of that. Some might come as part of electing mayors, and therefore reducing the pressure on MPs as the primary development, anchor for citizens, or trying to tighten up issues with the role of parliamentarians having to sit on boards and all these kinds of things. So I think there's many drivers that we need to consider, but we really take your note on this. It's my pleasure now to invite Mr. Trey Home. I hope or is it Creel Home? I'm way off. Deputy Head of Mission at the Norwegian Embassy, to also say a few words for us. Thank you. How do you say it again?
Good morning, everyone. Madam Executive Secretary, Special Advisor, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to join this important conference. I'm pleased that Transparency International and CDD is raising this crucial issue of concern to everyone interested in well-functioning democratic institutions, wherever they might be. Because around the world, trust in democratic institutions is declining. Citizens increasingly believe that political influence is for sale and that elections are shaped by dark money rather than public will. Opaque public funding creates fertile ground for corruption, state capture, foreign interference, and organized crime. Transparency is our sword and shield against secrecy and dark money in politics. In 2017, at the UN Convention Against Corruption Conference of State Parties, Norway sponsored the Resolution 7.2 on preventing and combating corruption involving vast quantities of assets. Following the adoption of that resolution, expert meetings were held in Lima, Prague, and Oslo. In the Oslo Statement on Corruption involving vast quantities of assets, a dedicated section addressed political finance, emphasizing transparency in accordance with Article 7.3 of UNCAC, the empowerment of independent oversight and enforcement authorities, the vital role of civil society and media in monitoring political funding, and the urgent need to address foreign political financing and the infiltration of political parties by organized groups. The 2021 UNGAS Political Declaration, paragraph 12, called on member states to maintain, strengthen, develop, and implement measures that protect the integrity of the electoral process and accountability to voters, transparency and impartiality in domestic electoral institutions and oversight mechanisms, and transparency in the funding of candidatures for elected public office, political parties, and electoral campaigns, with a view to preventing corruption, ensuring accountability, promoting good governance, and reinforcing trust in public institutions. Despite these recommendations and political commitments, low levels of transparency in political finance persist around the world. Dark money in politics is an issue that should concern us all. As the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre recently stated, an important part of democracy where parties run for election is that they should be able to receive support from engaged citizens. The condition is that the funding must be transparent, so that voters, the general public, and the media know where the money comes from, and that it is illegal to accept contributions from foreign actors. To date, the Conference of State Parties, UNCAC, has adopted 81 resolutions, yet none have addressed transparency in political financing. Norway has been closely following discussions on the potential for such a resolution over the past 2 years, and we have recently decided to table and sponsor a resolution on enhancing transparency in the funding of political parties, candidatures for elected public office, and electoral campaigns. We were impressed by Ghana's leadership at the 2023 Conference of State Parties, particularly the initiative to address gender inequalities in the fight against corruption. Given Ghana's strong focus on transparency in political financing, Norway would be very pleased to have Ghana as a co-sponsor of the upcoming resolution on transparency in the funding of political parties, candidates for public elected office, and electoral campaigns. I look forward to today's discussions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. I think this global dimension, it's really would help raise more awareness of the issue. I mean, this is a conversation that is also beginning to take root in the continent generally. A lot of, at least on the society side, people are very concerned about party and campaign financing. So I think once you elevate the conversation at the global level, then it will connect to all these other conversations that is happening. So we are done with our opening remarks. We want to now move into most of our presentations, and we have a lot of experts here who can share. They're going to share their thoughts and insights on the topic that we are dealing with. We are going to start with Transparency International Berlin. I don't know if we are ready. Have they been prompted? Joe.
Yes. Good morning.
Yes. So they are presenting on, these are reflections of Transparency International on the need for a resolution on Article 7.3 of the ONCAC. And I think the person is online. Okay. Welcome, sir.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning.
Yes. Yeah. Please, you can go ahead. Your audience is waiting.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Jorge Valladares. I'm the Political Integrity Lead at the Transparency International Secretariat. And I wanted to thank for the opportunity and congratulate you all, CDD and Transparency International Ghana, for taking the initiative to, first of all, reflect and try to seek improvements to the regulation of political finance in Ghana, on the first hand, and second, for also taking a step forward and trying to drive that initiative to scale it up to the international level and try to involve the Ghanaian government as well into leading a global effort to improve standards for political transparency in not only in Ghana, but also in Africa and the rest of the world. I wanted to give you a sense of what can be done or why this is needed. So let me just say that we recently published or created a new set of global standards for integrity in political finance. These were launched in December 2024, and it was the result of a year of consultations with not only civil society organizations from all over the world, but also governments, experts, election authorities, etc. Why we did this? It is because campaign finance and campaign finance transparency in particular is the weakest link of election integrity. Every year for the last 4 to 5 years, the Electoral Integrity Project, which is a global project that measures perceptions of election integrity around the world, ranks campaign finance as the weakest area where elections perform. So this is just not a problem of countries that do not have laws. It is also a problem that do have laws of countries where the laws exist, but the practice is very weak. Second, there is no global standard on political finance. Even though the Convention Against Corruption has an article that gives political finance transparency or recognizes the role of transparency in political finance to prevent corruption, there is actually no a detailed set of standards that indicate or can guide countries on how to do so. These similar standards exist in many other areas of anti-corruption fight, anti-money laundering, business ownership, etc. Political finance transparency is one area where there is almost no global agreement on what needs to be the minimum for that. And this is in the context where not only in Africa, but also globally, we've been seeing growing risks making political finance more vulnerable for corrupt interests to take advantage of these loopholes or weaknesses. No, online political advertising is being a tool for foreign interference, but also for illicit money being having some influence on elections. We also see more and more how affluent donors actually get very favorable arrangements by incoming governments. And we see that there is also a set of growing opportunities for using technologies to make political finance information more transparent. Let me just give two more reasons why this is relevant also in Africa. As you all know, the African Convention Against Corruption that has been signed by 48 countries in Africa has Article 10 that recognizes two tools, actually one more than the UNCAC Global Convention, two tools that refer to political finance in political finance in general. No? One has to do with the prohibition of illicit financing in politics, and the second, Article 10b, it mandates all signatories to adopt the principle of transparency into the funding of political parties. 48 countries have signed this. However, if you go and see the laws in many of these countries, only 24 countries have actually implemented this commitment in the law. And out of these 24, which is only half of those signatories, 4 countries in Africa have a level of transparency that allows to find this information online. So as my colleagues first said, I mean, the public deserves to know who is funding political campaigns, but only in 4 countries out of 48 countries in Africa, this can be done by accessing this information online. And why this is important? And also, correlation is not causation, but let me just give you another instance of correlation that makes a strong case for this. We've noticed that countries that do have the rules and also implement them in a very efficient manner tend to have higher scores in the CPI. The CPI is the Corruption Perceptions Index that Transparency International produces every year. And as you see on the right side of this figure, you see countries that do have comprehensive requirements that are properly enforced in political finance transparency. In average, they score 70 points. Those on the extreme left, you see where there is no disclosure or where is very little requirements and unclear enforcement, average CPI score is around 35. So of course there is a relation. We need to understand this operates differently in every country, but of course it has an effect. And let me just finish by saying that it is because of these facts that we find that Transparency International, for the last 2 years, since the last COSP that was held in Atlanta, has been talking to governments and presenting a strong case for calling for them to adopt a resolution that could set a minimum standard for how political finance transparency can be implemented in every country. And as the Norway representative just said, over the last 22 years, there has never been such a resolution. This year, for the first time, we see leadership for countries like Norway that are willing to put this issue on the table. It's not going to be an easy task because this is a controversial issue that would likely prompt some discussions from countries that do not wish to see this happening. But that's why we think it is very relevant for this initiative, which is most important, to have support from all regions around the world. We are also in discussions with the governments of Mongolia, the Dominican Republic, and Albania, who are also willing to or are considering their support to this. And we really look forward to seeing the government of Ghana endorsing this effort and co-leading together with other countries this very important initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valadez, for that overview. Really, I think, concise, straight to the point. So we know what the task is. Please bear with us. We are going to have a couple of presentations, and then we'll open up for some clarifications before we take our snack and come back to the second session. So we'll now take a presentation from Mr. William Nyako, who is the Executive Director for the Africa Center for International Law and Accountability. He is talking on the gaps in the political financing regime of Ghana and recommendations for reform. So, William.
Thank you very much, Kojo, and good morning to everyone. As Kojo has indicated, I'll be speaking on this topic. We'll go through some slides. Technology, corruption of the... Okay, so just by way of, as they say, I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you. We will go through, I think the point has been made about why we are here. Okay. Thank you. We will go through some of the global and regional standards frameworks for political finance. I will speak, I think I probably will skip the TI part because it's been mentioned. Then we'll go down to our own Ghana situation, look at the gaps that exist and some recommendations for our attention. So I asked this guy, why are we here? And he said I should give him time to think about it. It's been quite a while, but I think we all know why we are here. We are concerned about monetization of our politics and the impacts that it has on marginalized populations, including women, youth, and persons who are differently abled. In 2021, I was privileged to have been asked to lead CDD-Ghana's study on illicit funding of our parties. And we got some estimates as well. At the time, it was estimated that to run for president on any of the two main parties, NDC or MPP, you would need to have $100 million. At the time, the cedi to dollar exchange rate was better than now. It was 5 cedis, 75 pesos. So that translated to 575 million cedis. And of course, to run for MP was 4 million Ghana cedis at that equivalent. This was interesting because previously the study that was done by CDD and Westminster looked at the cost of politics in the course of the election. But this one looked at what happens before the election, nurturing the constituency as well as campaigning. Following that, we were asked to help Zambia to do a study, and we did a similar study in Zambia. And we even improved on that by having the cost of politics within 4 streams. One was the nurturing stage, the intra-party elections, campaigning for the election itself, and the 4 years that you are in office. As Kojo said, Shamima also mentioned that. Also very concerned about money that's coming from illicit sources. The CDD study put that in context. Vote buying now is done in open. There's a law against it. And of course, a big one, unregulated, the financing of candidates. As you see, our current legal framework does not capture candidates. And of course, abuse of incumbency, and of course, the need for a reform. So the concerns have come not only from civil society, but from the political actors themselves. The MPs have been complaining. As you can see from this montage, our colleague, friend, ABF Hussein, Mr. Proverbs, is no longer in parliament, but we'll recall a lot of the things that. So the political actors are unanimous in their view that something has to be done, because some of them leave office and really go broke. Just to look at global framework, the UNCAC, which Ghana ratified back in 2007, provides a certain framework, and you see where I've highlighted in black, really that must be transparency, and that the funding of candidates and political parties must be open and transparent. Also, the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption also makes this a very interesting prohibition on funds acquired from illicit funds. As we go through the Ghana case, you would see that ours is very porous. In the Political Parties Act, for example, there is no express prohibition of those. So those are some of the areas that TI, I will skip that, but just highlight a couple of them. Just when it comes to party financing, the accounts, I'm happy that the Electoral Commission is here. In terms of their reporting and all of that, you will see where there are some gaps in there. Now, the Ghana framework, our financing of political parties, the framework, legal framework, is first, of course, by the Constitution, and of course, put in practice by the Political Parties Act. By the time after we do this presentation, you will see why there's a need to seriously either amend our Political Parties Act or to completely replace it with some. And as you can see, this act was made in 2000, which was 8 years after we returned to constitutional rule. The naming of the law itself should tell you, the Political Parties Act, that this was not meant to regulate candidates. So there's a huge gap to begin with. And as you know, during elections, candidates especially get the greater chunk of the money. When people give them money, funders, they want something in return. So they give it directly to the candidates. I think in previous elections, we saw some videos of a presidential candidate. Of course, the EMB is here. Electoral Commission regulates, registers political parties. In other jurisdictions, there's been some discussion as to whether we should decouple the Electoral Commission's election management function from regulating political parties, like Kenya. We'll get to that. The requirements on political parties to file returns after every year, 6 months after that, 21 days before an election, and to also provide some accounting after the election. Financing of political parties, and this is when we talk about financing of political parties and candidates, one of the key things that we should be concerned about is the sources. Where is the money coming from? You know, in Ghana, we say only a citizen should fund political parties, you know, and the citizen is also a body corporate if the business is owned 75% by citizens. So you can see that there's no direct funding of political parties. There's indirect, and normally one of the things that people point at is the provision of what? Access to the media, equal time. But there is money that we give to political parties, and this is how we do it. If a presidential candidate gets 25% of the votes, they get their filing fees refunded. And if an MP candidate gets 12.5%, they get their monies refunded. Now, while this is, helpful, but it is also discriminatory the way we do it, because the smaller parties are almost all the case not getting the refund back because they don't meet that threshold. This uses the principle of proportionality. You get money as a proportion of your votes. What we need to do is to add the equality principle. The equality principle gives a baseline that if you're a candidate, you get a certain percentage, and then in order to encourage participation, you add up the proportionality principle. In practice, the law says something, but in practice, we know that candidates and parties are funded not just from licit sources, but also illicit sources. I mean, studies have shown, citing our own Speaker of Parliament who did a study, our own study also pointed that out. And this is an interesting statement by the General of Politics, General Mosquito, who said that when you are hard up for money to run your campaign, people bring you money. It's hard enough to get somebody to bring you money. So when they bring you money, you're not the one going to ask, where did you get the money from? Okay, there's no prohibition in the law. So it is something we need to work on. So let's quickly look at the gaps. One of the gaps is obviously that we don't have a defined, we don't have a campaign financing regulation. Remember, the name of the current law is Political Parties Act. So it just regulates political parties. We don't have electoral campaign financing regulation. There's a difference between political finance, which is the financing of political parties, and then electoral campaign financing, which is the raising and spending of money by candidates to influence a vote. So that gap is huge. Okay, that's the first thing. In order to also reduce the cost of politics, we have to have a campaign period, a defined campaign period. We have a defined exit campaign period, which is 24 hours before an election. You are not supposed to campaign. But we don't have a defined campaign period. And that is a key cost driver. The moment an election ends, campaigning starts, especially for those who lost the election. So the longer your campaign period, the higher the amount of money that you pay. You have to go to all the 16 provinces. I hope that the provinces don't change to 24 soon. So we have to have it defined. And these are examples of campaign periods in certain countries. Our big brother, Nigeria, is 90 days. All right, I think Cabo Verde has the shortest one, a few days. Constructively, though, we can model our campaign period on the EC. We can start by going with what we know. So as you know, the EC typically vets and approves or disapproves candidates about 3 months to the election, okay, which will fall into the 90-day cycle. So it should be easy for us to model it, to start with this and see how it goes. The other things are there are no ceiling limits on contributions. Within the Political Parties Act, the law doesn't say that an individual or corporation can provide this amount of money. And this is important because we want to address the issue of state capture of candidates. The more money that person gives you, the more influence that they have. And of course, contribution limits also go with spending limits, in order to make sure that the playing field is level. When people are giving you money, there's no requirement in the law to verify their identity. And so this is something that must be done. In other places, they put the requirement on the person or the party receiving the money, that you have to verify the person's identity. And I'm sure in these days, of a Ghana card, that should be easy to do. So there is this fight between the Constitution and the Political Parties Act. The Constitution provides that political parties must do what? They must publish their accounts and all of that. But the Political Parties Act claws back that open, transparent manner by giving the Electoral Commission the power to receive it, which is fine. But if you want to receive a copy of the filings, you have to pay a fee to the Electoral Commission to get that. It's one of the areas for reform. Political parties' accounts should be published on the website of the EC or must be available without payment of a fee to help with the transparency. Also, there's a prohibition on political parties or their representatives taking money or donations. That does not apply to candidates. Okay, candidates can take money. I mean, in law, you always have to say, show me the prohibition. If there's no prohibition, they can do it. So it shouldn't surprise you that candidates go overseas and go and take money, and they don't have to report, and it's not regulated anyway. Also, in a campaign financing regulation, you must prohibit abuse of state resources or incumbency abuse. It's not in the law. I mean, conflict of interest provisions are in the Constitution, and Code of Conduct for public office holders has not been passed. But in an electoral campaign material legislation, you must explicitly prohibit that. High costs of politics, vote buying is one of it. We'll talk more when we do the recommendations. There also, there's challenges with enforcement. And I'm sure the EC, Dr. Asari is here. He will talk about this. It's a catch-22. You have political parties that are not that strong. If you go out and apply in the law, 110%, as it is often said, they'll collapse. Sometimes when the NDC or NPP do not submit their reports on time, you're applying the sanctions, which could mean the registering a party and all of that. So within the environment to see how. And then there's this issue about state funding. I noticed that, of course, if you look at CDD study back in 2004, when it did a study asking if there should be state funding on political parties, majority said no. But over time, what is increasingly worrying is that the public has become very disenchanted with political parties. And therefore, you see it in Afrobarometer's data, for example, which shows close to 70% of Ghanaians are not in favor of state funding, direct state funding. They are not going to support any attempt to impose a levy or like e-levy to fund political parties. But the story or the framing of the issue is not completely correct. You use direct state funding to achieve certain state objectives. So for example, in Kenya, they use 0.3% of their revenue to fund political parties. And they do it for a purpose. One, once a political party receives state funding, that political party's finances will be audited by the Auditor General. They also use it to regulate representation. So a certain percentage of your candidates should be women, should be youth, should be persons who are differently abled. So I think that we need to relook at this and to see how we can apply some of these things to achieve certain stated objectives. In terms of reform, generally it would be, of course, we are talking law, Political Parties Act. It will either be completely, get rid of it, replace it with a comprehensive law which looks at political parties financing and electoral campaign financing as one big, law, or every 4 years is something. And of course, public education is also okay. But in substance, The recommendations would include, of course, what we've identified, define a campaign period, in the legislation that will be proposed. Candidates are part of the donut hole. You have to regulate them. And so the law should have regulation of candidates and the monies they receive. Of course, an amount, a ceiling on how much an individual organization can contribute as well. We've talked about this publication aspect, which helps with transparency, that publication of the financial records and records of candidates should be made available. We should consider what I have mentioned, a mixed model of state and private funding to use it to achieve that objective that I had mentioned. Also, of course, because when people donate or give money to candidates or parties, their identities are not verified. And sometimes when you set the threshold, typically in many places, you would have to disclose the identity of a contributor if it goes above the threshold, as one of the things. And I'm saying that, in our law, there is no express prohibition of funding from unlawful or illicit sources. When you look at Kenyan law, for example, they state clearly that it should not be from unlawful sources. And I'm sure if you've been watching or paying attention to campaign seasons, candidates travel overseas and they report, they have raised millions of pounds or millions of dollars. From who? It could be anybody. So we should regulate that in order to prohibit foreign funding, which the law says. Cost of politics, there are filing fees, things that the Electoral Commission, the fees that is set is one thing, and then the cost is also within the party. The Electoral Commission's fees are adjusted. We don't know the formula yet, but as you speak to the commission, some of them will tell you, if we make it so low, we have the presidential candidates, the ballot, it will be like 200. So part of it is like that. But you see, if it's just money, we show that Ekuadonko had the money, But if it's based on structures, so for example, if we require signatures across the country and things, it's more difficult than the money. That's something to consider. So within the state side is one, but the biggest cost is in intra-party elections. The delegate system restricts a number of people who can vote, and so it's easy to bribe them, as we see all around. So if you expand the delegate system to include card-bearing members of the party, so that your intra-party elections will be based on universal suffrage for the party members. But this will be a cost on the party, so you have to put in state funding. So the Electoral Commission, for example, can be mandated to supervise these elections and conduct these elections as a sort of state funding in order to do this. And then the current law, vote buying, really, it's only criminalized in public elections and referenda. So it doesn't extend to intra-party elections. If you are going to provide some sort of state funding, you can mandate, you can amend the existing law to include vote buying in intra-party elections. That's a way of dealing with it. And that will be it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyako. I think you've raised some really, really interesting questions and food for thought for us. In terms of the objective, transparency is key, but I think what Mr. Nyako has discussed really also deals with reducing expenditures, because that's one of the drivers. Sometimes when you think about it, you ask yourself, do people need all the billboards that, for example, they put up or they advertise on in order for them to be able to advertise their program to the people. They don't necessarily need it. So, but if one person is doing it, there is an incentive for the other person to also match in order. The last election, for example, this was the first time I've experienced sort of almost American style. How do they call those adverts on radio? You know. This negative ads, and it was almost every 30 minutes, some political party, and you're asking how much is this costing on prime radio at prime time. So we are escalating, even on digital media, the amount of money that we are spending. So there has to be some way to curb that, because if you don't do that, the exclusion is huge for a lot of people who cannot raise those amounts of money. What is also happening is that you are also getting party capture, because those who have money in the party basically then begin to control how the party, also organizes, and that is not good for democracy. It's not good for us. So there's a lot that I'm sure we'll come back to talk about. Now we are moving into, and this is just to give you some idea. This is a study that was undertaken by the GII, CDD, and GACC last year on abuse of incumbency and vote buying. It was technically led by Dr. George Ofosu from the London School of Economics, and he will share some of the findings from the study, just also to give you some real ideas about when we say the expenditure issue is a problem, that we're able to see and feel how that is. So George, I don't know if you're ready for us, but we are ready, and then we will take a reaction from the OSP, Mr. Samuel Apiadakun, who is Director for Strategy, Research and Communication Division of the OSP, who's representing the OSP, will then give his first reaction, and then we'll take some comments and questions from the audience, and go on a snack break, and we come back. So that's the agenda currently.
Yes, Kojo, thank you. All right. So thank you very much for the invitation and the remarks by Mr. Nyakun sort of set the stage for a discussion of abuse of state resources in Ghanaian elections. So as Dr. Asante said, I was part of the team with Ghana Integrity Initiative, Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, CDD, to study the state of the abuse of incumbency in Ghana's election, particularly in the 2024 elections. So just by way of definition, so that we know the beast we are talking about, abuse of incumbency, I think many of you in the room would know, refers to the use of resources by public officials to advance their electoral interest, by that fact. Resources in the literature is defined broadly to include both institutional, financial, regulatory, and coercive capacities of states that is entrusted in the hands of office holders to advance public interest. Now, abuse is said to have occurred when both either elected or non-elected public officials use the entrusted resources that we have put in their hands to support their own electoral campaigns, or to obstruct fair competition by, for example, restricting the access to various public services, resources that opposition parties could use. Abuse of incumbency have been a major issue in Ghana since 1992. In a pioneering work that CDD conducted in the 2004 elections, for example, they highlighted about four things that, if you think about the definition that I've given you in the last slide, could be considered as abuse of state resources, office to advance one's electoral interest. They included the blatant partisanship among officials who are expected to be non-partisan, especially our district chief executives, politicization of access to public facilities, the conversion of official state events into campaign rallies or campaign events in support of the incumbent campaign, and privatization of public goods for partisan advantages. Now, these issues have been recorded again in subsequent efforts to focus on this issue by GII again, GAC, CDD, IEA in the past, during the 2012 election, 2016 election, 2020. We keep sort of recording the same forms of abuse in our elections. Political parties themselves have also complained about the use of the state resources to advance campaign by incumbent. The problem is that they complain, and once they get into power, they do the same. Now, while it's very commendable the efforts that has been done in the past to record the various instances of abuse of state resources, we haven't been able to establish the extent to which these issues occur in the country. And this is just to say that, there are instances where the state had, incumbent parties had an opportunity to abuse their office, but they didn't. And there are cases where they did. And by trying to establish the frequency, but also the rate at which they do so, it would highlight the effort that needs to go into it, but also record the extent of the different types of abuses in our elections. So that is what we set up to do in the 2024 elections. We try to observe two types of events that could potentially be used as an avenue to abuse the state resources. One was state-sponsored events. These were events that were organized by our various district, metropolitan, and municipal assemblies, project in a commission and inauguration before the elections, sword cutting ceremonies, and national events that happens in the country during election seasons. But we also looked at party-sponsored events. These are events that are organized by political parties, especially the incumbent parties, but also opposition parties, to see whether the state intervene in a way that tilt the electoral playing field in their own favor. The issues that we looked at in these two types of events included the use of state events for incumbent campaign, partisan access to public infrastructure and services, restricting opposition campaigns, the use of the state resources at campaign events, and also recorded instances where there was handouts, vote buying at these events that we observed. We also did some work on media, but as of now, I'm going to be sharing the things that we recorded at the district level. So, of course, and this is an issue that was highlighted in prior work that has been done in Ghana. Monitoring and thinking about whether an instance constitute abuse of state resources or incumbency is really hard. So we gave it a good thought when we were designing our surveys and sampling and so on, to make sure that we are recording instances that could legitimately be classified as such, and to reduce things like observer bias. So observers might be very enthusiastic to call everything they see as an abuse. But also, once we get this report, how do we verify them? That those are all challenges to observing and measuring abuse of incumbency. So what we do is to use very simple questions, very binary, questions in nature, that asked specific questions about items and events that had occurred during these events that they were observing. So, for example, was there a party flag that was displayed at a public event that you observed? Was there a speech? And if so, if was the speech, did the speech include a call to vote for the incumbent party, for example? Very specific questions. If they answered yes or positively to all these things, we ask for details, photographs, but also location, precise locations where these things took place. This enables us to verify the issues that has been raised in the report. We sampled about 67 constituencies in the country using both purposive and random sampling strategies. We took all the 18 constituencies that were in the metropolitan areas, Accra, Tema, Tamale, Cape Coast, Sekondi, Takoradi, and Kumasi. And the 49 remaining were sampled from the rest of the country, taking into account things like regional representation, whether an incumbent MP was seeking a re-election, whether an MP represented the ruling party, that's the MPP in this case, and whether the constituency was electorally competitive. This is just to show that all the places we went to were pretty scattered around the country. So we have a pretty good sense in our data of what was happening across the areas. We trained our observers and deployed them for 3 months between 6 September and to 6 December. Field monitors, they reported weekly from the field using the instrument we designed that we installed on mobile phones for them to send their reports. Now, let me share a few of the things that we find to inform the discussion that will go on later on in the session. So first of all, most of the reports that we got were from state party-sponsored events, and I'll be more, as I mentioned, I'll be more precise. So about 86% were party-sponsored events, and 14% were state-sponsored events. Now, within that 3 months, 101 or 101 state-sponsored event is not trivial. It's quite a lot for the state, across the 67 constituencies that we observed. The distribution of these events were as follows. So among the party-sponsored events, majority of them concern door-to-door campaigns, campaign rallies, political party events like meetings and so on, constituted 20%. For the state-sponsored event, those that were organized by the metropolitan MMDAs were the largest. They constituted 39% of the reports in our sample. And 33% concerned initiating new projects, like launching projects, commissioning completed ones. And we also observed cases of government information vans that were making runs in different communities. Okay. So these are some of the key findings concerning state-sponsored events. Now, for state-sponsored events, we wanted to figure out whether those events were used for incumbent campaign by observing things like whether party materials were displayed, whether party songs were played, whether partisan speeches were given, state-paid materials were used for incumbent party campaign, and whether all parties were given equal opportunities to advertise themselves during these events. So here are some basic facts to take from our study. For the display of campaign materials, in about 62% of cases, our monitors reported that they saw MPP campaign materials present in the state events that were being done by the MMDAs, national celebration or project commissioning that they observed. You saw party campaign materials. These normally were party t-shirts, followed by posters, vehicles with the party logos, banners, party caps. Less frequently, they saw motorbikes, leaflets, and labeled like drinks of water that had the party logo on them. This obviously is the abuse of a state event to display party materials in the help of the incumbent party campaign. They also reported that in about 62% of cases, the party jingles, the incumbent party's jingle was played for about 4%, 4 times during the event, and each lasting about 45 seconds. Partisan speeches, we asked them whether any government official gave a speech. In 92% of cases, they said yes. 80% of the cases where there was a speech was given by the municipal chief executive. And an incumbent party official was also given the platform to speak during such an event about half of the time. In contrast, opposition party officials were allowed to speak only about 6% of the time, suggesting a lack of equal opportunity for parties to promote themselves in public gatherings. Ministers, district level bureaucrats, civil servants, and public officials also gave speech roughly 20%. Now, giving speeches in themselves don't constitute abuse of incumbency. It is when they are used to solicit votes that we deem them as an abuse. So we recorded about 144 speeches during this event given by these actors that I've just mentioned. 84% of them included praises for the achievement of the ruling party and explicitly solicited votes for the incumbent party. So this is quite huge in terms of speeches that are given by people that we deem as supposed to be non-partisan public officials who are giving speeches at these events. All speeches, I think I've mentioned this, so I skipped this, but most of them were given by the MMDAs. Now, there's also the opportunity for the incumbent party to use materials that were used in publicizing events to advertise themselves. Approximately 1/3 of state-sponsored events featured things like banners, posters, and so on. And 67% of the banners and 71% of the posters, the incumbent party candidate photo was prominently displayed. A similar proportion included messages, according to our monitors, that asked them to re-elect the incumbent party candidate. So while only about 14% of this event had billboards, almost all of them, 86%, had the incumbent party candidate's image and had messages soliciting support. Okay. So another thing has to do with, giving an equal opportunity for all parties. So in all the events that we observed, we asked whether a party representative was there, which party was there, representative was there, were they introduced, and were they canvassing for such candidate in such events. As we see from our data, about 35% of cases, our monitors reported that an MP candidate was present. Most of them, 89% of those cases, were MPP candidates. About 31% had an NDC parliamentary candidate present. And in these cases, in about 19% of these cases, they were introduced. The MPP candidate was introduced like 91% of the time compared to 41% of the time by the NDC candidate. Okay, so that's again is a demonstration of unequal opportunity for all parties in our body elections. Abuse of commissioning projects. We asked about whether there was a commissioning of projects in their district during the week that they were reporting. 77% of our reports indicated that, which is about 48 instances. Projects included like, school buildings that were being launched, education projects, and so on. 85% of the time, political party officials were said to be present in this event. The incumbent party candidate was present 64% of the time during this project commissioning. And in these instances, government officials campaigned for the candidate in 83% of their speeches. So again, abuse of commissioning state event to enhance the party's campaign. For party-sponsored events, we wanted to figure out whether there were restrictions on opposition party campaign. Our key finding is that there is limited evidence that the state abuses its coercive resources to restrict opposition activities. None of our monitors reported a serious restriction on opposition party campaign by security forces in their district during the time that we observed. We also looked at whether government vehicles resources were shared during the events that were organized by the incumbent party. 26% of the cases of incumbent party campaigns, our monitors reported that they saw a government vehicle, and there were about 2 of them on average at this event. So that is quite a lot. That's 26%, 27% of cases. They also said there were distribution of government resources in about 5% of cases, which we have to interpret with a bit of caveat because I think it's hard for them to really verify whether there's any, government resource of that nature that is being distributed. But the fact that it's 5% indicates that, this was something that is difficult to observe, even if they were occurring. Electoral handouts, that's cash handouts, were given at party-sponsored events about 28% of the time. We asked how many people they thought received such benefits. On average, it was 60. That's the median number, which is here. And the estimated cash amounts that were given to each individual was about 200 CD. They range quite a huge amount from some zero obviously to 5,000 Ghana CD, but the median, it's about 200 CD. Other handouts were given in 51% of cases. So it means that other things were given, which demands our attention more. They included clothing, branded material, but also tools and livelihood items like sewing machines, hair dryers, welding machines, cutlasses, and so on during this event. Motorbikes and motor vehicles, bicycles were also distributed. Some concluding remarks here. It seems that the integrity of Ghana's electoral process continued to be undermined by abuse of state resources by office holders. There is limited evidence that there's coercive powers being used to restrict opposition campaigns. However, office holders appear to privatize public resources during election campaign to tilt the electoral playing field. So just to reiterate what Mr. Nyako mentioned, I think there's a need for legal enforcement and development of ethical codes that guides the use of state resources during campaigns, but also to strengthen civil society efforts in monitoring and documenting and seeing how we are making progress when it comes to the abuse of state resources in our elections. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry if I have overrun my time.
Dr. George Ofosu. This abuse of clemency study was really thorough. I mean, but as George says, the methodology and the survey design that the abuse of clemency as a driver of the campaign financing and political financing problem is a major issue, and we haven't really paid attention to this area. So this study is to help bring more attention to it. The Corruption Watch also did also an abuse of currency investigation of the MPP candidate in 2024. Also brought out a lot of issues in terms of the use of state resources to pay for accommodation, flights, and so on and so forth. So we really need to, because what it does is that it increases the costs for the competitor. If the incumbent is getting it for free, but the competitor, in order to match, or would also means that you have to find more money to be able to create more platforms where you can be featured and so on. So these are all part of the drivers. So before we go to the snack break, because our next speaker also would need to leave us very soon, but we want to really take their reaction first before they go. So let me invite Mr. Samuel Piadakon, who is representing the OSP. He's the Director for Strategy, Research and Communication Division for the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Thank you.
Thank you once again, and good morning to all of us, distinguished guests and fellow citizens. I had come here with a prepared speech, but I will abandon it and stick to a few pointers. For us at the OSP, there are a few things that I may want to comment or bring about. The first one, it has to do with regulation of our financing, political party financing. We are of the opinion that the current system where the Electoral Commission is both a referee and a regulator must be abandoned. Ghana should explore the establishment of an independent political party finance audit committee, similar to that of Norway. So this committee would perform functions separately from the organization of the election, and we think that the body should consist of representatives from the Audit Service, the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and say the judiciary. And this committee can be headed by a judge. And this committee will leverage on existing expertise, infrastructure, and operate within a dedicated budget so that you are not creating a new office. So it's more of a committee that will be tasked with the job of reviewing annual financial reports submitted by political parties, ensuring compliance with Ghana's Political Parties Act, and then imposing sanctions for violations, and refers irregularities for criminal investigations as well as prosecution. But really, we also think that there is a cultural problem. Can you imagine if the Electoral Commission, in the performance of its regulatory work, decides to ban one of our two main dominant parties, NPP or NDC, ahead of the 2028 presidential elections? There was going to be chaos. So we also need to check our cultural difficulty with enforcement of such laws. Then our second recommendation has also been said. We think that the annual reports of the political parties should be published online for public scrutiny, thereby promoting transparency and accountability. We also agree with the presentation we just watched that we must amend the Political Parties Act for it to cover the spending and expenditure of presidential and parliamentary candidates. And we dare to say that there ought to be a way, when it's amended, that typically we get to know that monies are sent to these presidential and parliamentary candidates. The monies are sent physically. They go for it physically. It's not like many of them passes through a bank where you can track and follow the money. So we were thinking that, is it possible that we could have somewhere within our architecture where any donation will require that a tax is paid on, similar to like a gift, so that it makes it possible for political parties to keep a register, which, by the way, they say they do. But in this instance, because there will be a committee that will be independently checking their finances, it's either we are saying that any donation to the political party must pass through the bank, or that if the person pays, the person must pay a tax on it, so that the state indirectly also gets money. And yes, some people will say that, well, people will still go through the back door and give the money to them. That's where investigations will come in, because when we see your expenditure during the elections and how much you have declared, we may be able to know the difference. Then the other one is also, we believe that going the way of the Norway is also good, that if it's possible to reduce the cost of political campaigning, we should ban paid political advertisements on TV and radio, as well as the large billboards that clutter public spaces. If it's possible, this will prevent the wealthiest candidate or parties from dominating the public sphere and ensures the election remains a contest of ideas, not just of financial power. We think that if these things are done, they will help. Then, finally, we are looking at also an amendment of the Political Parties Act to state clearly that internal party politics is public election. Currently, there isn't a clear law on it, and when there's no clear on it, we leave it to the bosom of the judges. And sometimes it may be interpreted that may not promote the fight against corruption. So if OSP has a case against internal candidates within an internal party politics and goes before the judge, and the judge interprets the current vague provision to mean that internal party politics is not public elections, it means that the battle is lost there, although you can see clearly that an offense may have been committed. So we think that if that is done, it will also help. Then one of the main problems that we face for us at law enforcement, in enforcement of some of these things, is sometimes you don't know whether it's an issue. So let me give a typical example. At the OSP, we decided that Ghanaians were complaining too much about the expenditure when it comes to elections. And they see openly people sharing money and making profit out of this. So I'm talking about vote buying as well as vote selling. So we decided that we were going to make it a risky enterprise. And we decided not to go for only those who are giving out the monies, but those who are also receiving it. And I remember we were criticized for saying that we are going after the small fishes, as in the voters. But we are also of the opinion that if there is no market, then there will be no opportunity for the politician to want to give out the money. But we encountered a major problem. So there's a typical case that as of 24th of this month, we have filed an appeal. And we thought that it was going to be a very good test case for us to control the space. It had to do with a DC nominee or an MC nominee somewhere in Ashanti region, and there was a viral video that showed him allegedly demanding for a return of some monies he gave to the assembly members. And to our surprise, the court had, after months of delay of the judgment, the court said that there wasn't sufficient evidence to show that the man was actually demanding for a return of his bribe. Then we have asked a very simple question that if I give you, say right now we're about to vote and I buy food for many of you here, and then the vote happens and I lose the elections, Then I meet you outside and I say, give me back the food I gave you. The question we're asking that, so does that mean that, then what was the purpose of the food? Wasn't the purpose of the food now to either influence you or not? So we filed an appeal because we disagree with the decision of the court. And these are some of the problems we encounter, and we think that it also leads us to think of something which I will share and end. Maybe it's time for us to really look at the punishment for corruption. I know that in Ghana, especially with my media friends, every offense that's committed by a politician is called corruption. It's also one of the reasons why the OSP has a lot of problems, because people think that we are to do almost every offense that involves a politician, but there's a clear demarcation as to what is corruption by the OSP, as well as other financial crimes, which are still largely in the realm of corruption, handled by other agencies. And we think that in Ghana, the minimum punishment for corruption is 12 years, and a maximum of 25 years. And yet, we've not made a headway. But even if you take a look at Singapore, which is doing very well in the fight against corruption, the minimum is around, I think they are around 5 and maximum 7 if it involves a public officer and all that, or a fine of $100,000 US. And we think that if Ghana could also somehow amend its law, because you see, I was looking at this Kumasi case in my mind, and if you aggregate the money the man gave to the voters, maybe somewhere around 3,000, 4,000 in total. And I'm thinking that things could work on the minds of judges as well. So this guy gives 3,000, and I can give him a minimum of, say, 12 years. That makes it tricky. We also think that if Ghana could, because if you look at Kenya, they are also within 510. And also it can reduce this whole posture of the politician wanting to fight us as if we don't like them. But it is not by our choosing that our mandate is to fight corruption among 3 people. First would be anybody who is a public officer. The second, politicians and their family members. When we say their family members, it means the wife of the politician, the husband of the politician, the children of the politician, and close friends of the politician. They all come under, it's not our fault. And the last group of people are those in the private sector. But other than that, then people tend to say it's a personal score and all that, but that's really our job. Our job, and the people within our jurisdiction are purely politicians and their associates. So if you're not careful, you might think that we are going after a group of people, but it's not us, it's the law. And then maybe finally, I've said finally, but the last one will be that just to clarify a little bit about OSP, I think that there's also some misconception about the office, and I'll use this opportunity to clarify. The OSP is a state agency. Often, especially with my media friends, they tend to portray the OSP as if it's a private law firm of the head of the agency. That's the Kisi Ejabin. So it tends to always be Kisi versus. And he's called the OSP instead of the special prosecutor, the SP. People tend to call the head of the office OSP. It's like calling Ghana Police the IGP. The office is called Office of the Special Prosecutor, and the one who heads it is called Special Prosecutor. But really, the office is a state agency. It's a state agency, which is both law enforcement and at the same time, independent prosecutorial office. So sometimes the people get a bit confused. We are a full law enforcement agency and at the same time an independent prosecutorial office. What this means is that when it's time for us to prosecute somebody, we don't seek the permission of the Attorney General. It's already given to us by law. So we just go ahead and prosecute without going back to the Attorney General. We are the only agency that does not go back to the Attorney General when it wants to prosecute. It's already given to us by law. And then again, we are a state agency. The only difference is that we don't fall under any ministry. So we don't fall under the Ministry of Interior. You won't find us there. But as a security agency, we should have been under Interior. And if you go to the Attorney General's office, you won't find us there. We don't fall under the Attorney General. If you go to Ministry of Finance, you won't find us there. So we are not under any ministry. And that makes people sometimes think whether we are a state agency, but we are a full state agency. except we are independent and we are not subject to the control of anybody in Ghana. That is why the special prosecutor has a fixed non-renewable term of 7 years. When he's done, he goes. You can only remove him whilst in office if he commits a stated offense through impeachment, like the way the current, the suspended Chief Justice is going through impeachment. That's the way to remove the boss. So with that said, my point is that without such reforms, we will continue to chase corruption downstream, never confronting its political roots. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darko. Let me recognize the Transparency International Ghana Board Chair, Reverend Dr. Emmanuel Ansa, who's here. Also, the TI Ghana Deputy Chair, Dr. Samuel Kwashi. You are very, very welcome. Our CDD Senior Fellow, Ambassador Chega, has also been here since the beginning. Okay, so thank you. We've had some really great presentations, very rich. I hope that you've been taking notes. Before we go on the break, I wanted to, turn to you if you had any clarifications. We have Georgie Velades is still online, I believe. And then Dr. Giorgio Fusu is also online. Mr. William Nyako is here. If you needed any clarification, any question on their presentations, we'll take that now before we go on the break. Thank you. So the floor is open. Yes, Ambassador Cheka.
And it's about the recommendations. One of the recommendations, in fact, it goes through most of the discussions that we've had this morning, is that we should make candidates declare what they receive. And we've also agreed that sometimes it's very difficult to audit that. My thinking is that why don't we concentrate on the expenditure side? Because for me, it would be easier to monitor and audit. If a candidate is from a constituency, you can go to the constituency. You see the number of posters that is around the area. You can monitor the advertisement, both digital and the traditional. Go to radio stations, find out how much they are spent. Even the issues of in-kind donations, rice, motorbikes, and all those things, any serious forensic auditor can go onto the ground and find out how much or how many of those items have been distributed in the area. Once you have an idea of the expenditure, then you can start asking, how did you fund those expenditure? And if we are going to go into putting a structure in place, my suggestion would be that let's start from the constituency level. Let the candidates at every election file returns on their expenditures. And in that return, you also indicate how much you have received in terms of donation. In Ghana, because of the nature of our financial transactions, we all agree that a lot of the money will come in cash. So you cannot shed light on it. But you can see the items that the candidate is spending on. So what I'm saying is that whilst we start the discussion, let's start also talking more about the expenditure side, because that is where you can find out exactly whether the money is illicit, whether it's illicit or not, where the money is being spent. and it did not feature too much in the recommendation of Mr. Nyako. Thank you.
I'll take some additional comments. So, Mr. Nyako, please take note of it. Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Bilal Malam Sani. I'm from WOLDAF, that is Women in Law and Development in Africa. In fact, the presentation was excellent, but I was curious to see the gender dynamics. How does it play? Because how does it play when it is a male candidate? What are some of the expenses? And then when it's a female candidate, what are some of the expenses? So that we can also zoom it or look at it from the gender perspective, and maybe we can also get some clue from if the female representative is spending less compared to the male, so that we can do the analysis as well. Thank you.
Yes, I think the 2018 study had those analysis. I don't know if William is something you remember, but maybe you can shed some light on that. Please, any more questions? Clarification? Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for your presentations. I have just one question that I want the panelists to clarify for me. There is this famous statement that elections are won at the polling station. So almost everything about elections take place at the polling station. We know that the two major political parties, that is the NDC and PP, have this cycle of electing polling station executives. And even in their constitutions, they have some specific rules for them as well. If you look at all the monies that go around, all of that eventually end up at the polling station. And officially or unofficially, it is the responsibility of these polling station executives to make sure that the monies get to the voters. So whilst these polling station executives are a force to reckon with when it comes to mobilizing voters to participate in election, they are more or less also the ones who buy the votes for their parties. So in finding a solution to this vote buying menace, how do we ensure that whilst the ward branch, that is a basic branch of every political party, is important for their mobilization, it doesn't become a vessel or a channel for buying votes? Thank you.
And I think Mr. Daku made a very important point about the intermediaries and the recipients of, vote buying, basically the vote selling. Because if there's a demand, there will be a supply. So to what extent do we address the supply side? Studies that have been done or investigations that have been done by Corruption Watch, for example, shows clearly that this is a huge cocoa season for people, particularly in the delegate system. People make lots of money from these activities. And there has to be a way that the law also tackles that side of it if you want to really move forward. Any final questions or comments? And then I can ask maybe William and George maybe to also make some final comments, and Georgie as well. Yes, and then.
Yes, my name is Jeffrey Okansi. I want to ask if, I'm looking at the nature of our campaigns. Is it not the reason why, the duration, if we have a wide period and then also we have the structure it takes, rallies, if there's a way we can limit all that, I think it will bring down the cost. But then also my last point is about this issue my senior spoke about, declaring what is given to the candidates. I am so Ghanaian, I don't believe we can get there. We are so dishonest as a people. The Ghanaian to go and declare that they received X amount for their campaign, until we squeeze in the timing, how can we do it? So that it has just about 1 month to go. You know, how can we do it so that we can ban all rallies and then have what CDD and the rest have been doing, a common platform for all the political parties, so that the candidates will have, each region, they have X amount of opportunity to speak on the same platform. And then my last one is about this incumbent and the resources issue. Comes a bit technical when the person is the president. And so he is actually moving as a president, and the security detail must move with him. So how do we limit all that, you know? Because are we saying that maybe during that time, we'd have the Electoral Commission to provide, the state to provide for them X security, and we can measure for all the candidates? We can't, because he's the president. And he has to, if we can, then we should explore it. Because if he's moving as a president, he will use the plane, and he will move. But if we can say that, look, this number of times they will get access to this facility, I think that will limit a little bit. But if we leave it like this, he's going as a president, the detail must move, he must be housed by the state, I mean, and all goes on like that, and they'll be abusing the office.
Thank you. And so, Georgie, if you're still online, maybe you can give us some perspective of how abuse of incumbency is regulated in other jurisdictions. I know, like in the US and other places, there are particular ways in which that is addressed. William, you can also talk a bit about that, and also the investigations you did for last year. Reverend Ansa, yes.
Thank you very much. I just want us to look not just at this report. You mentioned there's been a previous research.
Yes.
I wish we had a little more information so that perspective over the range, maybe even since 2000, for example. Then we see how this is growing as a trend and what measures have been put in place and where have we had failures and all of that. And then the second thing is, how is the participation of the parties at this stage of the discussion? Is it that we'll finish and then involve them, or what? Where do they come in? They need to come in at the highest levels right from this stage, so that if the decisions are being made, or even the views that are being shared here, they are strong men or women are part of. I'm very sure it will go further. But if we've completed and it's a package, and we go and say, normally the trend has been that the incumbents don't support meetings like this. It's when they are in opposition, they are very active in meetings like this. After they lose power, the tables turn. So if we want to be solution oriented, I think we should look at that side of things, the parties and their involvement in such engagements. Thank you.
I mean, so let me just share that between, I think, 2023, early 2024, for almost about 2 years, we were working with the multi-stakeholder group that included some of the leaders of the parties. Because on this issue, I can say the parties are aligned in many ways. Sometimes, because I think, particularly MPs, they are the receiving end of money politics, because you always are at risk of losing your seat just because somebody appears with lots of money, nobody knows where it's come from, and so on. But they've already even produced a roadmap of how we should be proceeding on these things, and brought their insights as to how do you do this practically within the parties. So I think there's already a lot of interest for the parties. It's just a question of how do we do it to make sure that it would work in practice. And so, as I said, this is just the beginning of the conversation, and we're going to reactivate the multi-stakeholder group, because they are going to be like the technical group and that includes leaders of the parties. So just to put that on the table. Ambassador Chega, I think you wanted to say. Okay. Yes.
I mean, you cannot run away from Air Force One. You cannot run away from the presidential car, which is, for example, bulletproof. But when you are going to a party event, the party pays for it. The fuel, the driver, the security details that you use for that particular occasion, it's all paid for by the party. So it's not state-sponsored, but you use the state facilities so that the taxpayers does not pay for your party activities. That's the example in some countries. So we can look at what other countries do and then fashion our law to take care of that. But this is not an issue that is not it's peculiar to Ghana, and people have solutions to it.
Okay, let me take William, and then I think Georgie, if you have any comments on what has been put out.
Thank you. These are excellent questions and suggestions. Because my memory keeps fading, even though I'm still young, I will take the last first. So on abuse of incumbency, there was a question about whether we can deal with it, because when, for example, the president is going on a state function, we can deal with it. And the way we deal with it is, first, we define a campaign period. So, for example, if we say a campaign period is 90 days from when the Electoral Commission approves a candidate, from typically September to December, we know that the candidate is doing campaign activities. In fact, in Nigeria, a candidate, let's say for president, cannot commission projects and all of that during the campaign period because it is an abuse. So first we define the campaign period. And second, as Ambassador Suga said, once the campaign period has been defined, that almost all the activities that the candidate undertakes, they are all campaign. And so if the president is going to Kumasi, for example, expenditure side, and it's a great idea, but we can also make it comprehensive by first establishing the law on receipts and then backing it up with expenditure as well. So there must be that requirement if you want to place a spending limit on it. So on the other side, there will be contribution as well as spending limits. I leave the remaining difficult questions for my colleague panelists and presenters. Thank you.
Georgie, do you want to add anything?
Hello. If you're referring to, because there are two Georges, so I'm the one who knows the least about the Ghanaian political finance system, but I would still like, exactly. But I would just like to also emphasize how many of these topics are very relevant for that have also international angle. Let me give you a couple of examples. Well, first of all, I have to say there is a level of sophistication in not only in the challenges but also the policy recommendations that many of you have put that I have seen in very few other countries, I have to say. So I think this is a very promising discussion that is certainly having the richness of and depth that will certainly would tell about a very good outcome down the road if there is a political willingness to address these issues. The first comment I want to make is that just related to many of these issues, such as, for instance, expenditures that was just mentioned, but also the proposal to set up an independent oversight agency that could specifically scrutinize reports, etc. The point that I believe, I mean, because I'm coming from the international angle where the minimum is transparency, but we should look at transparency as a gateway to unlocking other challenges or addressing other challenges. Transparency is not only receiving something and putting it online, or I mean, hopefully online and not against a fee, but it's also about the ability to unveil what is concealed, no? Because so transparency should not only mean having the technical capacity to publish, but also having the technical and financial resources to be able to audit and scrutinize to verify the validity or truthfulness of the information that is being reported. So transparency should not be seen in these very constrained terms of just putting information online, but actually we should have a very holistic view of transparency that gives these other tools and powers to the authorities in order to be able to do this. Then a second comment has to do with so how important it is that there are many other accessory or complementary angles to look at this and at the interplay between corruption and political finance. And I think one essential one that also has to do with the anti-corruption framework is the issue of abuse of incumbency and the abuse of state resources. I think you have been treated to a very fine, comprehensive, and excellent presentation on the report, on the research on that it's been presented by George. And I would say there is an angle for that also from the anti-corruption framework, the international anti-corruption framework. Abuse of authority should be understood also not only in general, like any abuse that can be done by an incumbent while legislating or setting rules or managing public resources, but there must be a particular subset of refined tools to address abuse of incumbency, that is an UNCAC related article and offense in the context of elections and in the context of political financing. One of the main keys to level up the playing field is that all contestants have a fair chance to contest, to compete in elections, no? So therefore, abuse of incumbency is one of the main threats that uh, undermines this principle. So I would say, first lesson that I take from this morning is transparency has you have given many examples or whereby you can see how transparency can also be seen as the ability to unveil what is concealed. And second, another excellent angle and very powerful angle to address the issue of illicit political financing is addressing first the abuse of incumbency, which also is connected to the anti-corruption framework internationally. That's all from my side, and thank you very much.
So it's 11:47. If we can come back at 12, I think the coffee break is outside.
The promise was unequivocal. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, presidential candidate of the New Patriotic Party, in the December 7, 2024 election, will not abuse state resources by using state vehicles for his private campaign for president. He will use a campaign bus. Dr. Gideon Boakun, the spokesperson for Dr. Bawumia, told Joy News in an interview in June last year.
This is a private campaign of the vice president. And so he doesn't want to abuse the incumbency. So he decided that for this private political campaign, he's not going to use state resources. So he has his own set of vehicles. And what is important is that he could have, afforded to use V8s or whatever. But he thinks that in order to be frugal and also show that he's a leader that is prepared to, put to proper use the resources that he has.
However, a Corruption Watch investigation has uncovered evidence of the use of vehicles belonging to various state agencies in the campaign activities of Dr. Bawumia. When Corruption Watch contacted the Bawumia campaign through its Director of Communications, Dennis Miracles Abuaje, the campaign agreed that there may be some state vehicles involved in their campaign activities, but explained that the use of such state vehicles were not sanctioned by Vice President Dr. Bawumia.
There's nothing about abuse of incumbency. We are not there yet. Absolutely none. Everything about the state that has to do with Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia is enjoined on the state to do it. Even if he doesn't wish for it, he doesn't have a say. The state is mandated by law to do it for him. He may not want it, but he doesn't have a say. And let me tell you one thing. The use of the bus is not something that the security team were very happy about. They were not. But he was insistent on showing the way and leading the way in this aspect. Every other thing, even if he wishes not, he doesn't control it. Two things. He doesn't control the security system and the detail that is assigned to him. He doesn't, so he may not wish for it, but he doesn't control it. Secondly, he doesn't control the fact that I, Miracles, decide that I'm a DCE. He's passing to Kwewu and I decide to follow him. He doesn't control that. He doesn't control that. So these two things he has no control over them. But what he has control about is the fact that he has decided that he would run this campaign in a bus for two major reasons: reduce the cost on the campaign, and two, increase our efficiency and effectiveness of this campaign. And we are really succeeding on that.
Corruption Watch sought to understand, among other things, how parties and candidates source vehicles they use for their campaigns, taking a cue from CDD-Ghana's campaign financing study in 2022, which found that businesses and individuals provide funding for campaigns.
We are getting vehicles. Some are even giving their vehicles to us to use for the campaign. Some have also branded their vehicles and given to our constituencies to use for the campaign. Afterwards, they take them back. Some also have just left their vehicles and say use it for the campaign. So it comes in different forms. Remember, we have 276 constituencies across the country, all of them prosecuting a campaign for us at the constituency level, electoral area and polling station. You have somebody at the polling station who has actually given his vehicle to the electoral area and say use this vehicle to move around and campaign. So they brand it. In fact, others have been branded for us. There are also individuals who have branded their own vehicles and are part of the campaign and campaigning. So it's not every vehicle you see on the streets that is branded MPP, that is actually owned by the campaign or the party. That's a matter of fact, and that's something that is a very important point. It's not every vehicle you see on the street that belongs to the party. Individuals have branded their vehicles and using it themselves to campaign for the party. Individuals have branded vehicles and given it to constituencies and regions and parliamentary candidates to use to run a campaign.
Our analysis shows that about 60%, or 6 out of every 10 vehicles used by the Bawumia campaign, belongs to the state. In addition, 20%, or every 2 out of the 10 vehicles in Bawumia's campaign, belong to businesses, some of which have benefited from single-sourced multi-million cedi contracts given under the Nanado Bawumia administration. The other 20%, or 2 out of 10 vehicles in the campaign, belong to prominent individuals. Some of the state vehicles involved were from the Office of the President, a Nissan Patrol, Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, a Toyota Land Cruiser, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, a Nissan Patrol, Ministry of Special Development Initiatives, a Toyota Land Cruiser, Ministry of Food and Agriculture, a Nissan pickup, and the Ministry of Education, an Isuzu pickup. Others are Ghana Water Company Limited, a Toyota Land Cruiser, National Health Insurance Authority, a Toyota Land Cruiser, Ghana Library Board, a Toyota Land Cruiser, Asokwa Municipal Assembly, a Toyota High Roof van, Nkaria Senior High Technical School, a Toyota Hilux pickup, and Nursing Training School Kumasi, a Mitsubishi pickup. Some vehicles belonging to public secondary schools were also involved in campaign activities in spite of a Ghana Education Service practice against the involvement of public second cycle institutions and its resources for political activities. Corruption Watch captured several school buses involved in the Bawumia campaign. The schools whose buses were captured are Nkoko Senior High School, Bipong Senior High School, Mpraiso Senior High School, Nkwetia Presby Senior High School, Nkwasco, Kwahu Ridge Senior High School, Salvation Army Senior High School in Achim Wenchi. Mr. Charles Yao Aheto Chega, former Director General of the Ghana Education Service, has described the use of buses of public senior high schools as an infiltration of political influence in Ghana's education system.
The practice as it has been with the GES of public campaign activities is that the schools are not venues for political campaign. That is the first principle. And it is based on the fact that a majority of the children who are the children who are in the schools are below the voting age. So they are not an area or a group to actually be campaigned to, because they are largely not voters. In earlier times, it was even probably stricter in terms of the fact that you couldn't even go for the buses. So secondary schools were cut out of the whole voting system. Their facilities were cut out of the whole voting system and were literally reserved for the purposes of education.
So at what point would you say this practice changed to now allowing politicians access to your buses?
It has grown incrementally, especially when the politicians started providing the buses for the schools. I say the politicians because, again, it was couched to look like, the political individual within the space where the school is influential in causing the school to come, the bus to come to the school, so when they need it, they can come in. And it has continued. I mean, we won't limit it only to this current regime, but it has become more intense in this current regime. But in the previous regime, under the NDC, it was happening.
Also involved were some senior high school students. On Friday, 11th October 2024, some students of the Jacobu Senior High Technical School were bused to Second Lady Samira Bawumia's engagement with identifiable groups at Jacobu in the Odotobri constituency of the Asante region. Mr. Tega described the practice of taking school children out of their schools to political campaign grounds as an abomination.
That is probably an abomination because it is not allowed. Because, I mean, if you can't come there to campaign to them, why do you want to take them out? No, I mean, when you follow the principle, if you can't come in to campaign, why do you want to carry them out? Because they are not people who are going to vote anyway. So why do you want to carry them out? So that is why I think it's an abomination, because it is not expected that should even happen.
Mr. Tsega called for the enactment of a law to protect the schools and their heads from political control.
It is time to really regulate that system and make, define clauses that ensure that, these things become bounded in law and therefore can become a strong point of departure for the headmaster to refuse politicians in terms of the way they act.
There were also businesses that supported the campaign. Prominent among them were J.A. Plant Pool Ghana Limited, member of the Jospong Group of Companies, Rona Motors Ghana Limited, and Birchfield Ghana Limited, a subsidiary of the KGL Group. J.A. Plant Pool Ghana Limited has been awarded a $178.7 million contract for the District Road Improvement Project, DRIP, through the single-sourced procurement method. Similarly, Rona Motors Ghana Limited was awarded a single-sourced contract for the supply of a Land Cruiser at 1,195,000 Ghana cedis for the Controller and Accountant General's Department on the 19th of September 2022. The company was also awarded about 7.7 million Ghana cedis contract by the Ministry of Finance to procure 5 SUVs and 1 cross-country 4x4 vehicle on September 19, 2024. The KGL Group, which is the parent company of Birchfield Ghana Limited, was awarded a 55 million Ghana cedis digitalization contract by the National Lottery Authority in February 2022. Among the prominent individuals whose vehicles were found in the pool are Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, the NPP vice presidential candidate, Brian Achampong, Minister of Food and Agriculture and MP for Abetifi constituency, Samuel Erickson Abaka, Member of Parliament for Shama, Anthony Abaifa Kabo, a former Deputy Minister for Roads and Highways and senior aide to Dr. Baumia, and Dr. Henry Kwabena Kokofu, former Executive Director of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Although the vice presidential candidate of the NPP is currently not entitled to military security as an MP, he was provided with heavy military security in addition to police security during his campaign tour in the Akwatia constituency in the eastern region. Miracles Abwaji, who is also a presidential staffer under the Akufo-Addo administration, defended the provision of military protection for NPP vice presidential candidate Matthew Opoku Prempeh.
What is your vice presidential candidate entitled to? You have justified.
He's a member of parliament. He's entitled to security.
One policeman.
Yes.
So,
but he can apply. He can apply. He can apply.
So we have video of him with military.
He can apply. There are private. He can apply. There are private individuals in this country that are allowed to apply. They apply and they get military escort. They get police escort. Once you have applied, gone through the due process, you haven't flouted any law.
So as far as you are concerned, do you know for sure that he applied for military
anything that he is not due, which he believes he needs more of it, he has applied for a fact, and it's been given to him.
You can provide proof.
I don't have to provide any proof for that.
Corruption Watch understands that the police provide security to all presidential candidates and their vice presidential candidates. Corruption Watch also wrote letters to the public second cycle schools requesting clarification about the use of the school vehicles for Dr. Baumia's campaign, but none of the schools has returned Corruption Watch's request for comments. In the period that Corruption Watch monitored the activities of the Baumia campaign from September 4 to November 4, 2024, we found that a total of 136 vehicles were used in campaign activities across 4 regions. 76 of the vehicles, making up 56%, belong to the state. 32 of the vehicles making up 23.5%, belong to businesses, while the remaining 28, which is 20.5%, belong to individuals. Notably, the 136 vehicles exclude identifiable police vehicles, that is, vehicles using GP number plates or visibly embossed with the word police, some national security vehicles, and vehicles for hire such as Ayalolo and Metro Mass Transit Limited buses, registered to the Ministry of Transport, and an STC vehicle registered to the Agricultural Development Bank. Corruption Watch's evidence shows the use of those vehicles by the Baumia campaign in Wassa Manso, Wassa East Constituency, Western Region, Odotobri, Bekwai, Aswase, Subin, and Ejura Sechiredumase constituencies in the Asante region. Upper Manya, Nkoko, and Akwatia constituencies in the Eastern region, and La Dade Kotopong and Kong Katamanso constituencies in the Greater Accra region. The vehicles were captured during campaign activities of Dr. Mahmoudou Baumia, the NPP presidential candidate, Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, the NPP vice presidential candidate, and Mrs. Samira Baumia, the second lady and wife of Dr. Baumia. Anti-corruption campaigner and director of policy engagement and partnerships at CDD-Ghana, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, explains the concept of abuse of incumbency.
Abuse of incumbency is basically referring to an incumbent or a person who is in an official position in the state using their official position and the resources that they are entrusted with, for personal gain, mostly during elections. And so when we refer to incumbents, often people think about a presidential candidate, but also we are talking about a parliamentary candidate. So if you are an MP and you are even in opposition, right, you are still, if you're a sitting MP, you are still an incumbent, and you can use that position and the resources that come with it to abuse power unfairly.
Commissioner of the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, SHRAJ, Mr. Joseph Whittal, explains abuse of incumbency within the context of Chapter 24 of the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, which contains the Code of Conduct for Public Officers.
Under the Constitution, Article 284, no public officer shall put himself in a situation where his public duty conflicts or is likely to conflict with his personal interest. All right? So if you take incumbency abuse from the angle of the code of conduct in the Constitution, it means that anytime a public official, from the presidency to ministers of to members of parliament, all the elected persons who are seeking political
to action. The agenda has been presented to us. The Deputy Ambassador to Norway, our friends from TI in Berlin, and others that have spoken have talked about the sponsorship of the resolution on Article 7.3 of the ONCAC. On political finance transparency, and calling all stakeholders to support that resolution to generate this global conversation. So I will call Professor Osai Kwapon, CDD Fellow and also Director of the Democracy Project, to basically make that call to all of us, to stakeholders. And then after that, we'll get a statement from the Electoral Commission. Dr. Mabosman Sari is here. representing the Electoral Commission. So, Professor Sarkopong.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. So what I want to do in the short time that I have is to draw attention back to this call to government to sponsor the resolution on Article 7.3 of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and I'll show that shortly. So there will be two parts to this presentation. First is the context. So the article, political parties in Ghana's democratic space, and then our political candidates in our democratic space as well, and then what I call the funding and the transparency dilemma. Then in the second part, a quick assessment of the current state of political financing transparency, addressing that political financing transparency, a few examples from other jurisdictions, and then the call to action, which has to take into consideration the political realities that we face, but also how we as a country can accept the co-sponsorship invitation from Norway. So this is the article against corruption. It says, each state party shall also consider taking appropriate legislative and administrative measures consistent with the objectives of this convention and in accordance with the fundamental principles of its domestic law to enhance transparency in the funding of candidatures for elected public office and, where applicable, the funding of political parties. I underlined a couple of words to highlight the fact that this fight is not only a legal fight. I was once part of a conversation where one of the speakers said, in Ghana, if it is not written in law, no one gives it much mileage. But as a student of public administration, I've also come to realize that there are administrative ways that we can draw on to be able to address some of the challenges that we face. It is not every single occasion that we need to turn to the court or we need to bring up some law. No, we can also sometimes use our administrative practices and procedures to address certain issues. But we have to make sure that it is also consistent with our own principles of domestic law. The transparency is the issue. I like the fact that the primary focus is on, it uses the phrase political financing, because most of the time in these conversations, we've focused a lot on political parties, but this is actually looking at the financing of all politically related activities, and I think that is a very important distinction as well, with a focus on candidatures. Because as you look at the legal landscape, as in Mr. Nyako's presentation, you would see that a lot of the focus is on parties and not necessarily candidates. So I took a look at the constitutions of our two main political parties. I know that we have about 15 registered political parties. What you would see is that these two main political parties have designed very elaborate, not just a political organization, but an administrative organization as well. So they share certain common design features. They have certain common political practices as well as administrative practices as well. If you look at how they conduct elections in terms of timelines, multiple rounds of voting, use of the delegate system, these are very elaborate, comprehensive things that they've put in place to help them not just manage the party, but also position themselves for election. And the point about this, I'll make it shortly. Now, if you transition from thinking about the political party to the political candidate, think of the first bar as Ghana's political landscape. 16 regions, 276 constituencies. Think about all of the towns, cities, places that a candidate for national office has to travel in order to be able to get the vote that he or she seeks. So for a national candidate, you ideally would have to travel that entire political space. For a candidate for local office, depending on your region, depending on the size of your constituency, that burden of coverage would vary from one candidate to another. It takes money to do this. I think sometimes there's the misconception that when we raise issues about transparency and the role of money in politics, it is not because we don't recognize that money has a role to play in politics. These things require a certain amount of financial resources to be able to do. So that's not the issue, right? There's a financing imperative because there's an administrative cost running for office. There is also an administrative cost for maintaining these party structures and all of their officials. But there is also a transparency imperative as well. So the issue is not that you don't need financial resources, but in putting together those financial resources, we just want to know who contributes, why, when, and how much. If you are able to answer these basic questions, no one begins to then become suspicious of the motives of those, or even how political parties or even candidates for office are able to finance their campaigns. I mean, when you listen to Mr. Nyako's presentation, the first question you're asking yourself is, so that $100 million that it cost to run for president, who is paying for that $100 million? And what do they want? If I were running for office and someone gave me a contribution of $100, I wouldn't be too suspicious of their motives. But in as cynical as this may sound, I don't think anyone would give you $1 million, $2 million of their hard-earned money for you to run for office because they so deeply love democracy and believe in what you can do for the country. That may be part of it. So it's the only reason why when we highlight the transparency imperative, we just want these basic questions answered. But this is what you get. The finance imperative, easily they'll take it, they'll give it. But it's when you raise the issues of transparency, it seems like this becomes the answer. We don't even want to hear it. We don't even want to talk about it. So now let's look at some of the assessments of the current state of political financing, transparency, and other issues. A lot of the good governance democracy indices out there, not many of them really look at your campaign finance architecture. This is from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation Index of African Governance. And they have a question about access to public party financing information as well as private party financing information. So if you look at the baseline number from the data they collected in 2014 and 2023, essentially we don't know who gives what to whom and why, and even how much. I went online, again, just looking at the state of enforcement. So there's an article that goes as far back as 2009, talking about parties that have not submitted their audited accounts to the EC. Same thing several years later after the 2016 election. There was a lawsuit by the Ghana, I think it was the Citizens Ghana movement. I don't know what happened after that, after the court ordered that those accounts need to be published. But again, that's part of the enforcement part of the financing, transparency in financing that we are dealing with. So these are some examples from other jurisdictions. So in the US, for example, if you go to the Federal Election Commission's webpage, you can find everything from how much is being raised by parties, by candidates, by groups on behalf of parties, what they are spending it on, if they are taking loans, how much debt they have. You can get it by particular candidates at the state level, at the federal level, what office they are running for. This is from the UK as well, financial data of political parties, campaigners, and other groups. Again, donations, spending, all of that, 1, 2, 3 clicks away. This is from Chile. Again, a lot of transparency in both what political parties are doing, but also what candidates running for office are doing. This is from Brazil. You can get the full accounts, financial statements from parties as well. So there are other jurisdictions that have made efforts to deal with transparency in their political financing that offers us some good examples, some lessons that we can also draw on in designing what works for us. It doesn't mean that in these places, and I'll use the US as an example because that's where I live and work. It's not that people don't try to circumvent these rules or they don't try to break them. But to a large extent, one, there is great compliance because there's a sanctions regime that is very enforceable. So I lived in the state of Ohio years ago where the governor pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor. You know his offense? He went to play golf with some of his friends, and they paid $30 for him, and he forgot to report it on his ethics form because this was a group that apparently also sometimes does business with the state, right? So it's not that there aren't incidences of people trying to circumvent it, people registering political action committees and finding, creative ways of raising and spending money on candidates. They try, but when the law gets you, you wish you never tried. So Ghana is invited to table a resolution on political finance and transparency at this upcoming conference, which will be co-sponsored by Norway. There are some political realities that must be taken into consideration. In as much as I would regularly say that our politics is becoming polarized and partisan, sometimes the lines are drawn somewhere, and I don't see that when it comes to political finance and transparency. One time I said to a very good friend of mine in one of the main political parties when we were talking about, so who is paying for all of this campaign? And I said, what if your party sets the example? You submit the account to the EC and you publish it. My friend looks at me and says, see, you academics, you live in an ideal world. And she says, that would amount to unilateral disarmament. If I can't count on my major rival also doing the same thing, it will be foolish, sebi on my part to do that, right? So there is that written bipartisan agreement that how we raise and spend money, perhaps privately they know, but publicly they may never tell us. There also appears to be this public ethos of secrecy. It's the reason why I like the RTI law, because I feel like sometimes when you approach public institutions or public entities, and you ask for even the most mundane type of information, the initial response is never one of eagerness to share. So years ago, I needed information for my dissertation research from a state agency. Not a state secret, nothing. In fact, these were reports that are on their website, but hadn't been updated for 5 years. So I went there, and the bureaucrat I meet, his first response to me is, "Who sent you to me? What do you need the information for? Because I'm going to give you information, and before I know, you are sitting on Joy News and talking about it." You know what it took for me to get that information? My mother. She's the best research assistant you can ever get. So I sent her, and of course, she can also be very dramatic. So she goes to the agency, looks for the director, starts crying, and says, "I understand you are the one trying to make sure my son doesn't get his PhD." Right? And by afternoon, they were calling me and saying, "How do they get that information for me?" But why must it take that, right? If you don't have a mother who can go and cry to some agency for information, then what do? Then there is also, for me, a perverse political culture that views associations with candidates and parties as transactional. I support because I want something in return, or I expect something in return. And that is also then governed by some secrecy, right? Once in a while we would hear stories that, person A gives money to party A or party B. But we are never able to verify that. I recall one time a gentleman was bragging that his party had submitted their audited accounts. And Professor Kwesi Prempeh writes in response and says, "Does that include all the money and the cars that person A says he has always been giving to the party?" And everybody starts laughing. But the bigger point was that there is even some level of mistrust as to whether the thing that you are claiming you have done can be verified, that really you submitted these accounts, truthfully. The other political reality that we have to take into consideration, and William shared that, is public opinion. I am a big fan of, if you can create a public funding mechanism for political parties, I will support that. But the political appetite is no longer there. So in the call for action, you ought to consider this if that is one of the things that you want to place in that call for political action. Years ago, when CDD-Ghana did that study in 2005, they had a question on that, phrased similarly to the Afrobarometer question in 2022. And by 2022, you see that the Ghanaian appetite for any kind of funding, public funding for political party is completely gone. It's also at a time you can understand where there is a low level of trust in political parties. Afrobarometer has two questions. How much do you trust the ruling party? How much do you trust opposition political parties? And there is no significant difference in those levels of trust. Very low. So you have to keep in mind public opinion and some of the things that you may be thinking about, whether you should put it in a call to action or not. I like IDEA's typology. So this is the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, when they look at transparency in campaign financing. Right? They have 4 different categories: bans and limits on private income, public funding, regulations on spending, reporting, oversight, and sanctions. And I like this typology because I think it provides us a good framework in that call to action of where can I get the most mileage and where are the fault lines within the context of my individual country when I'm trying to address transparency in political financing. In the area of bans and limits, for example, and Mr. Nyako already mentioned this, you can consider proposals around how you close the gap between candidates and political parties. Because if you look at the checklist that IDEA has, a lot of it applies to political parties, but not candidates. So anybody who wants to circumvent the process can just give the money to the candidate as opposed to giving it to the party. Setting reasonable limits on donations. As I said, nobody opposes or disagrees that political parties, candidates need money to run for office. It's just a question of, is the sky the limit? But even as I stand here and talk about certain reasonable limits, there's a famous case that eventually got to the US Supreme Court, where they equated money with speech. And the court's ruling was that we all approach and do things in the political arena differently. Some people campaign, some people vote, and some people vote with their money. And so if you restrict spending and donations, you are restricting speech, and that offends the Constitution. So it's quite an interesting but complex ruling. However, I still believe that we can find ways of setting some reasonable limits on how much you can give to a candidate or a party. And then with the kinds of donations that you also want to prohibit. Public funding, because public opinion is against any kind of, especially direct public funding, are there acceptable forms of indirect funding that would be acceptable to the public? Regulations on spending, again, reasonable limits on campaign spending, reasonable limits on types of things that candidates and parties can spend on. Reporting, oversight, and sanctions, again, closing the gap between the requirements for political parties, because that is how the law seems to sort of fall on, right? More demands on parties as opposed to candidates themselves. Also, a clear sanctions regime for non-compliance. So one of the sanctions that I once floated was that, wouldn't it be great if when candidates are filing their, the contestants for whether presidential or primary, the EC actually says to them, we don't have your audited accounts and therefore you are not eligible to run. I mean, I know it won't be an easy thing in terms of what it would generate, but once in a while I've dreamt of that, right? Like the ultimate sanction that makes you ineligible from running for office for violating a provision like that. Public access to that information becomes very important. If we decide, for me, there are several reasons why it will be important to accept this invitation from Norway to co-sponsor this resolution. But I highlight three here. One, our sincere commitment to sanitizing the role of money in Ghana's democratic politics. I think it also offers us a very good opportunity to play global leadership role in addressing a threat to democratic politics. And then it also demonstrates a willingness to respond to concerns that citizens regularly raise about the role of money in democratic politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kapon. So our last statement, and because the Electoral Commission has been mentioned several times, would ask Dr. Bosman, who is talking on the challenges with enforcing transparency and accountability requirements of the political parties. Dr. Bosman. Thank you.
All protocols observed. The Electoral Commission is extremely grateful to be part of this important discussion. And to begin, I bring you greetings from the Electoral Commission and also from the chairperson who would have wished to be here. Let me start by saying that Ghana's constitution is very clear on multi-party democracy. But when you look at Article 55, it encourages the formation of political parties. However, when you look at the same constitution critically, especially in terms of how to elect a president, how to elect a member of parliament, it also encourages a two-party system. So what the experts would say, majoritarian democracy. So as the EMB, the law enjoins us to ensure that as a multi-party democracy, all the parties are able to function very well. But from the discussion we've had so far, I think Lawyer Nyako and all of you, we were trying to suggest that maybe if you go hard by the law, you may end up living only two political. So how do you have only two political parties in an environment of multi-party democracy? So when you are in charge, your job is to make sure that the system must run. So the Electoral Commission at times must ensure that the smaller parties are nurtured, we support them to be able to make progress and become competitive. However, there have been instances when the smaller parties did not live up to expectation. So in 2022, for example, we deregistered 17 political parties. At the time, we had almost 28 political parties. So a number of them, their registrations were cancelled. And regarding today's topic, especially on the financial aspects of the political parties, this is something the Electoral Commission takes very, very serious. And from the discussion so far, the law enjoins us to get certain information from them. But we also know that, as has been said by Lawyer Nyako and the other panelists, the requirement is on the parties, not on the candidates. So all of us who see the adverts, the billboards, but the statements they will bring to you, you look at it and realize that, what I saw on TV, every part, that's not what is reflected. But the question is about getting it from the parties. So what we are basically saying is that transparency and accountability are very, very central in a democracy. If we want to make progress as a country in our democracy, transparency is very, very important, just as accountability. They are equally important in the operations of political parties. That's why even our constitution stresses that the internal structures of political parties must reflect democratic practices, and this is very, very central. One area where transparency and accountability are important in the scheme of political parties is the sources of funding for campaigns and the financing of political parties in general. It's very, very critical that as citizens, we need to know, how are you getting the money? How are you paying for all these adverts? These things are very, very important. And financing of political parties is regulated by many election management bodies. And in Ghana, we have something very, very similar. Although many have acknowledged that this is something we can do more than what we are currently doing. The 1992 Constitution, for example, stresses in Article 55, it stresses that political parties must declare to the public their revenue and assets and the sources of those revenues and assets, which is very, very central. It also requires political parties to publish to the public annually their audited accounts. So you can see clearly that as far as our laws are concerned, political parties are enjoined to do certain things right, but the reality appears to be different. And as Electoral Commission, we've noticed that a number of the parties have been having challenges complying with submitting their audited reports, financial returns. So the Commission has taken it upon itself to even build the capacity of the parties. And since we started this capacity building in 2018, we've seen a lot of progress as far as the presentation of the reports are concerned. So for example, last year, we teamed up with IFES, and we met all the treasury officers, the financial heads of the political parties to take them through some training on how to bring their returns to meet international standards. So the Commission, desirous of ensuring that political parties comply with the law, we have also designed a new reporting format. Because in the past, you realize that the parties would just sit somewhere, put something together. Even in some of them, when you had informal discussions, as if their leaders were accountants, they would just sit somewhere and put something together. But the Commission took it upon itself. So we organized some capacity building programs for them to ensure that they will be able to present reports that meet international standards. And the Commission has also set up a compliance unit within our legal department. And the job of this particular unit is to ensure that the political parties are complying with all the requirements stated in the political parties law as well as in the Constitution. And since we started that, it has brought a certain level of professionalism in the way the political parties present their reports. And we think that this is a very, very, very much significant progress we have made as an institution. And we need to also say that in 2018, for example, we had a number of the parties that did not present the required reports. The same applies to 2019, but since 2020, we've seen a lot of improvement, which we think is in the right direction. However, I need to also state that in spite of the efforts we have put in, organizing programs for them, capacity building, setting up a unit to ensure that the political parties comply, we still have a number of them that are still not able to live up to expectation. And because of that, the Commission has decided that looking at the general weaknesses inherent in the law, we need to introduce a new constitutional instrument, which will be more stringent, and which will require that some of the discussions that have gone on. For example, we are talking about people who are making the donations, who is behind it. So the Commission has decided that we need to have a new instrument which will be introduced in Parliament. We will work with the AG's department. Once we have the new instrument in place, we think that this instrument is going to be stringent enough, which will mark a significant departure from what we have been seeing. Because as I said, we've been making some progress, but we think a lot can be done. And with the introduction of a new instrument, we expect that all the political parties, once you are accepted as a registered political party, you should be able to comply. And the parties are aware, we've always been urging them that make sure you do the right thing. Because you can't call yourself as a political party and you will not be ready to abide by what the law says. But as I said initially, as an institution, we also recognize that some of the parties, the level is such that when you want to go strictly by the law, as I said, the country may end up having only 2 political parties. And when you look at the data we have, almost in all the instances, both the MPP and the NDC, you can see the reports they will bring to the Commission, they meet the standards you are expecting as an institution. But they are not the only political parties. So we need, as an institution, to support the other parties to be able to measure up to the standards. And I know Lawyer Nyaku also mentioned something about the fees for the filing fees. If you notice, the filing fees in 2020, what we charge the candidates, in 2020 they paid, presidential candidates paid 100,000, and parliamentary paid 10,000. The Commission didn't increase it in 2024. And for those of us who are here, I know we know the value of 100,000 in 2020 and 100,000 in, I think somebody gave us a data. The lawyer now used a 5.75 to the dollar in 2020. In 2024, we maintained it. And even for female candidates and persons with disability, we reduced it by 25%. And as you indicated, the smaller parties always indicate that, oh, we are the ones giving the easy money. And we ask them, how are you giving us money? They say, we will not get the 25% and the 12.5% to be able to come back for the money. But for the MPP and the NDC, In the last election, I think in almost all the constituencies, almost about 99% of the constituencies, the MPP and the NDC, they got the parliamentary, they got the 12.5%. So all their monies will be refunded to them. But for the smaller parties, I think so far the data I've seen, less than about 10 hit the 12.5% mark. And I think that these are discussions we can have as a country. But as far as the commission is concerned, we think that some of these fees are so important to sanitize the system. But we are also mindful of certain figures that will also encourage people who genuinely want to take part in the process to take part. So to sum up, the Electoral Commission is committed to ensuring that the parties comply as far as their audited accounts are concerned, as far as their financial returns are concerned. And as I said, we intend introducing a new CI which will be more stringent than what we currently have, so that we can get the best from the political parties. Because we believe that the parties are set up to lead the country, to be in charge of public management. So as an institution, as a country, we should also be concerned about holding them to a higher standard. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for those two presentations. So we'll take some last round of any comments, questions to our last two presenters, and we'll try and wrap up. If you have any burning questions or comments. Yes. Who has the mic? Okay. Yes, the lady first.
Hello, my name is Priscilla. I'm from the private sector. Something that I'm extremely concerned about, especially when we talk about the multi-party system, is encouraging especially young people to set up political parties. Many of them are concerned about not having money, but like it's been stated, you don't necessarily need money to be able to, well, money is not necessarily the only way of calculating how much resources someone is using for financing. So I guess the question is, how does this resolution support or encourage persons interested in setting up completely new parties? Is there any provision for that? Does it encourage them? Thank you.
All right, okay. So yeah, well, I think the issue that was raised about marginalization, is this resolution going to improve more inclusivity in the multi-party process? Yes, Sagovi.
Hello. Good afternoon. I think
you probably have to introduce yourself.
My name is Samonate. I'm a private legal practitioner as well as I work at the Norwegian Embassy. I think for me, listening to Michael Nyako and quite a lot of the presenters, I think there's one thing that, and also Professor Kwapon as well, I think there's a few things that maybe we have not paid attention to, and particularly in relation to existing institutions that can help us tackle some of these issues. Now, political parties in this country are incorporated entities. So by law, at the end of every year, they will file annual returns. They will file with the Office of the Registrar of Companies. They will file with the GRA. So, as Ambassador Chaga said, there's no reason why we can say that there isn't enough legislation to tackle the issue of public financing of political parties. Because if political parties file their audited accounts with the GRA, the question then becomes, what is in that audited account? Because if that audited account filed with the Electoral Commission, it's not the same as what is filed with GRA. There's a discrepancy. Now, if the political party has said that its total income at the end of the year was 100,000 cedis, its operating expenses was 500,000 cedis, and 100,000 cedis. So at the end of the day, everything balanced out and it's 0-0. Now, if you look at the two major political parties, on election day, if they have not mobilized at all, they will mobilize over 30,000 agents. These political parties feed these 30,000 agents morning, afternoon, and evening. So if they are spending 100 cedis, that's over 7 million cedis on election day alone. So it is not easy for you just to put any figures in your audited accounts and say that these figures add up. It means that at GRA, at Electoral Commission, at ORC, nobody is paying attention to these figures, because if these figures are interrogated, we will know that this billboard cost you this amount of money cannot be able to finance the activities that you did throughout the country. So then names will come up, donations would come up. If musicians in this country say that they have these assets and they boast about the amount of money that comes up, immediately GRA does a lifestyle audit on them. And you see some of them go back and beg. So the question is that the political parties get away with these things because some other institutions do not enforce what we already have.
Okay. I'd like to take, these are the final comments, so if you have any, you want to take that now, before we go back. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Haruna Mohammed. I'm the Deputy General Secretary for the New Patriotic Party. Having listened to all the presentations here, I think Transparency International is looking at ways at which we'll be able to meet that resolution of, that is Article 7.3 of the resolutions that has been passed, and we're looking forward to be able to participate and meet those particular standards. And if you look at it very carefully, and it's talking about the fundamental principles relative to our domestic laws and how political parties are funded and how we can be able to check this. In all these circumstances, you check what is the laws of Ghana with respect to political parties funding. And if you look at Act 574, clearly, the major thing that we have to do is to amend that particular act. Give power to political parties to do private businesses, to generate income, so that these political parties, when they run businesses on their own, which are duly registered within the laws of Ghana, their incomes that they generate from those particular legal activities will be able to show up their balance sheet. In that instance, these political parties and other agencies that are supposed to measure them will be able to account and audit them properly. You talk about them submitting what their assets are. Where did they acquire the assets? On which basis? By donation? By gifts? Why not empower them to do business, to generate? How can state fund political parties? What would it lead to? To the end of what? For me, I think political parties must be given the power to do business, and the Political Parties Act should be amended to reflect that.
Okay. Yes, I think there's one. That's not the back.
Okay, a quick one before the main question.
You can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Kojo Mensah Brompa. I work with Adum TV and Adum FM. If we are to empower political parties to do business, what kind of business would they be doing? What kind of business would political parties be doing? And the candidates or the executives that will be running the political parties, many of them has their own businesses that they run. Would that not be conflict of interest whilst running their private business and running the business of the political parties that they sit on? That aside, I want to ask Mr. Dr. Asari, Bosman Asari, if he will want to respond to what OSP suggested, that we should decouple the EMB function of EC and that of the finances, that the accountability and the transparency aspect that they audit the political parties. I want to ask Dr. Bosman Asari if he wants to comment on that one.
All right, I think there's, I'll come back to you, Priscilla, and then there's let's see.
Yes, I think maybe we should get more clarity on allowing the political parties to run business, amending the law. We can look at amending the law, but the proposal to allow political parties, if we can really understand. Yes, my name is Christopher Kevin Asima from CTFM Channel 1 TV. If we can get more clarity on allowing political parties, maybe if he can throw more light on it, because won't it go a long way to create a lot of conflict of interest issues, like my brother said? What kind of businesses are they going to engage in? And this is a party that can one day rule the country. So when they are in government, how are they going to be fair in terms of their businesses they run as a party compared with other business? There's a whole lot. If he can really give us clarity so that we can go and think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady at the back. The lady at the back and then the gentleman.
Okay, so let me. My name is Sika Togo from Campus Radio Universe. My question goes to Dr. Asari. In terms of speaking to issues of political parties and then their finances, he was speaking about the two major political parties being the NPP and NDC, most often than not meeting the requirement of maybe the financial statement and things like that. But if you look at the things over time, you notice that almost every time the infractions are always ascribed to the smaller parties. Is it always the case that the political parties, being the NPP and NDC particularly, always almost are in fidelity with the law as compared to other parties? Because in wrapping up, you see that even when it comes to the availability of party offices in certain constituencies, some of these offices there show maybe during some 6 months to elections. After that, when you go back to those constituencies, those offices are non-existent. So how do you balance the two? Yeah, thank you.
The lady at the back. Oh, okay. Okay, Priscilla.
Thank you so much for this opportunity again. I think I wanted to talk a little bit more about the other kind of financing that we have kind of ignored a little in this conversation, is the power of social media. We have seen presidents who have won elections in other parts of the world, fair enough, but it's happened. In Romania, in Ukraine, they've won using the power of social media. Now, I don't know what other resources they used, but in Ghana, we have over 76% of our population that is less than 45 years. We're talking about younger people who use social media. Obama has, in his recent talk at the Connecticut Forum, made reference to the fact that communication now is transcending in a way that we cannot comprehend because of the use of mobile technology. We need to address the fact that people can access information anywhere, anyhow, just because of technology available at the hands of everyone, even in the rural communities. So how is social media being addressed in terms of financing in this resolution as well? I think it will be good to touch on that. Thank you.
And just to say that the resolution, I'll come to you, Aruna. Just to say that the resolution basically would address sort of the broad commitment. So it's really to kick off the conversation about, but the details you raise is very important, because if you ask the parties, they're also spending a lot now on digital resources, because as you said, it's become another cost that now you have to look at, seriously. And then when you begin to even track, if people begin to send, these days there's even Bitcoin, all kinds of things. How do you regulate all those kinds of resources and all of that? But Haruna, just to, maybe if you just wanted to add something small so that we can put that all on the table and get, okay, I'll come to you.
I've made a point, and some have asked for clarification on when I say political parties should be given the opportunity to do business. If you check in South Africa, the ruling party then, or the political parties, have been given the opportunity to do businesses. The most conflicting times is when the political party is in government. The president ruling the country is different from the political party. The political party stays as a party, and the political parties has the responsibility through an elected president. There are many instances where, because you are in power, people start to think that government of the day, which is the political party, should be funded by the president. There are many situations that the parties would have to call even the governance system, which belongs to them. Because of no clear ways of funding, those political parties are not able to make very straightforward discussions or even commitments to that. But if a political party is given the opportunity to say to have a farm, to have a company, to have activities to do, the national chairman, general secretary, and party executives are not part of government. They are running a corporate institution by name with their political party. And if even the government is going contrary to the ideology of the party, if the party is firmed financially, can call out the government and tell them this is wrong. So political parties should be given the opportunity to do businesses. And them giving the opportunity to do business does not run them into conflict of interest. If the general secretary decides to go and pick a ministerial position, he leaves his position. And whatever he does there has no reflection on the corporate institution called his political party, but has a reflection in his office that he's running. So I don't see any conflict of interest in this manner. But political parties, when given the opportunity to do business, must express so within the confines of the laws of the country.
Yeah, I think on the, I can see that I don't want this to be the the focus of, because, so there are three things, but I think what Mr. Haruna has introduced is to also remind us that, so we came here, we started with the political financing issue, right? And we've talked about it. Georgie has talked about that it's not even just, the transparency part, but even the concealment part, trying to unravel. But we've also talked about reducing the cost as a general commitment, that what he is emphasizing is that we also have to think about how do we fund political activity, given all the experiences that we are rich. Because if we don't also address that, then whatever motivations that go to people drawn to parties and so on would affect the other parts of the issues that we are addressing. So this is one idea of trying to solve the how do you fund parties component. And there could be other ideas as to what do you do to really make party financing more genuine, that it doesn't lead to the motivation for people to want to have to take something because they are contributing to party and all of that. And I think we should take that in that context, rather than just isolating it as just, a proposal that, we have to knock down. But I think we should think of it in a bigger framework. But I want to come to Dr. Bosman. I think you had about 2 questions. And then Professor Osai-Kwapong, you can just give your comments on whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay.
I think the first one had to do with the first one relates to the proposal by the director from the OSP that the regulation function should be taken away from the Electoral Commission. And Mr. Brampa, you wanted me to find out whether I agree or yes, I want to comment on it. My initial comment is that I completely disagree. The reason why I completely disagree is that the law as it is now, the EC is doing the work excellently. The law as it is now. So if the law should be amended to require that the EC needs to get information about the individuals who are contributing the monies to the parties, the EC will ensure that that one is implemented. So the law as it is now, and as I indicated, initially we were having some challenges, but we've seen a lot of improvement. And we will continue to build the capacities of the party so that we'll get to the point where this thing will become a very seamless process. Then there was a second question about the smaller parties. I think I was making the point that when you look at the smaller parties, the MPP and the NDC, they have the structures. Almost every district in our country, there is the MPP office, there is the NDC office. But the smaller parties, so, and let's be very clear, although I said initially that our constitution is clearly a multi-party democracy constitution. When you look at the experts in comparative politics, they will tell you that any system where two parties can get more than 75% of the votes, then that is clearly a two-party system. And in Ghana, if you check the data, I think from 2008, the two parties have been getting over 95%. I think in 2020, they got over 98% in the presidential. In 2024, I've not looked at it, but I believe over 97%. But since the constitution is a multi-party, the commission has a responsibility to ensure that we support, we nurture the smaller, we give you the time if at some point you are not able to maintain yourself properly. It's the reason why in 2022, the registration of 17 political parties we canceled their registrations. Currently, we have about 15 on our books. Very soon, the commission will go out there to check whether they are meeting the office requirement and others. If you don't meet, the same will be applied to you. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Professor Sakwapon is fine. I mean, most of them are comments that I think will take us forward. Really, in terms of next steps, as I said, this is just a starter. We are going to activate a technical group that, as I said, some of them have worked already for about 2 years on some of these issues to really begin to look at the legislation that's available. And it's going to be a multi-stakeholder group that brings all the perspectives and all the lessons that we can draw on. We've met the Attorney General. He's very interested. I think the government has also indicated, the presidential advisor was here this morning, that this is a very important issue. There's general commitment across board from all stakeholders, and we need to take advantage of it and push this agenda. I think the lesson for me that we have to learn is that you need to adapt these things to your circumstances. Otherwise, most of the time, it doesn't work. And we've seen that in Kenya, in Nigeria. We all have to come to a certain reasonable understanding of what the problem is and how we can address it. It makes compliance easier when we come to that consensus. And there are many dimensions to it. I think we shouldn't be dismissive of the funding part. It's it's an issue when it comes up. People are, oh, no, we are tired of political party, we don't want to. But you don't wish away problems just by pretending it doesn't exist. So it is something that we have to put our minds to, and I believe that we have people that are knowledgeable, that really can bring ideas for us, to move forward on this. We invited the AG and Shraj, who are also key actors in this direction, and unfortunately they couldn't join us, but they've also indicated their commitment, and we'll be engaging them further on this. And we thank the OSP and the EC for coming. Let me see. Yeah. On our part, as I said, basically we are moving forward, and you'll be hearing from us. It's not just persuading you, media, and so on. We need to go to the regions. We need to talk to our people. They need to understand why, when we talk about regulation, it's important. The same way we regulate nurses and doctors and accountants. Because why? Because even though these are private, professions that people can go and set up, but if they are not properly trained, they'll cause a public health problem for us. The same way political parties are governments in waiting. If the process for electing their leadership, their flag bearers, and so on, is not upright. It's not. It doesn't have integrity. Then whatever you get as a government becomes a problem for the citizens. We talk about capacity, all those kinds of things. So it's the same logic. The consequences, or what is at stake, is so huge that we have to make sure the political parties can, do more in preparation for governance. Because when they are better prepared, when they are in government, it helps us all, right, to govern well. So we will be continuing the conversation, and we thank all of you for coming today on a Friday to start this conversation, and you'll be hearing from us. Madam Mary, I don't know if there's any other. Okay, all right. Let me thank all our organizers and supporters, and I believe there's lunch. Conversation continue. Thank you.
We are maturing in our way forward as civil society organizations. We are not in contention. We are brethren. We are working together. And let me also add my voice to one thing that I heard from our friend online, Georgie, as you mentioned. He said something which we all as Ghanaians need to think about. He says he is not able to contribute much to our situation because he is from a culture of transparency. I felt very sad. Take it home. Pray that Ghana has a culture of transparency. How come he's not able to comment? Because, and I had that problem when I was also pursuing my Doctor of Ministry program. My Franciscan priest, Catholic Franciscan priest, who was my supervisor, anytime I wrote about the churches in Ghana, he would say, Emmanuel, you are forging stories. It doesn't sound real. When I tell him about the practices going on in many of our denominations, the succession challenges and the conflicts and the way people personalize church facilities and all. It was very alien to him. I hope that one day we will be the role models. The transparency that he's looking for, we'll find it in our country. On this note, let us pray.